keep going with it. Practice it. Lots of people use the example of playing the piano. Once you've learned your scales, you don't just say, that's that done, next. You keep going until you get this automatic nature of playing the scales, and you don't have to think about them anymore. You can just do it. So lots of over practice, regular consolidation, continuing to come back to things and look at them in different lights. One of the big misconceptions about mastery is that people think we teach something for a really long time, and then we teach something else, then we teach something else, and we just do that once and they never meet it. I see secondary schools in particular at the moment where first term in year 7 is just place value, and that's it. Well, that does achieve something. That makes kids hate maths. That's what that achieves. And it's also a stupid thing to do, because place value is not a standalone topic, and maturation matters. So John B. Carroll proved in 1968 that what ability is simply your learning rate. It's a measure of your learning rate, how long it will take you to learn something. And they also looked at maturation. As we grow older and we're learning a mathematical concept like place value, as I grow older and learn new bits of maths, I can come back and look at that idea from a new light. I have new internal schema, and I can see it in a different way and make new meaning from it. It's the exact same, I know some of you are English teachers. You'll have seen a child struggle through a poem, and later on, as they get to grips with the words that are in there, the meaning of it, maybe something else about the story of the poet and what they were thinking, they can make new meaning from it. It's not just about saying, yeah, did that. It's about really getting into things, coming back to them. So, as we're teaching, what we're then doing is continually assessing all the time. And this assessment, this formative assessment, true formative assessment, so in real time and contextualised in the moment. Okay? We know there's pretty much no point in marking books and then 3 weeks later, the kid has a look at it. But formative assessment in the moment, fixing something right there and then, has a huge impact. And that's what we're kind of doing as teachers. We're continually working out what they don't know so that I can act differently. And that act might be, I might just tweak slightly what this student here is doing, because I know what that tweak will do. I know what it will achieve by doing that. So I'm continually assessing, and I can do this through really nice problems. I can do it through tasks, through activities. I can do it through low-stake quizzes, regular quizzes, all the time. Low-stake, deliberately low-stake. One of the things that the 89 format got really badly wrong with the introduction, some of you are too young to remember this, damn you, but some of you will remember this. One of the things it really got wrong, so in 1989 when the tagged group introduced national curriculum levels, and there were 20 levels originally, and that kind of made the process become one of simply labelling. Tests became about labelling. This is a thing you can do and this is a thing you can't do. Whereas actually tests or quizzes, they're opportunities for the educator to learn something about that individual so that you can do something about it. That's what they're meant to be for. And if you look at tutoring, if you look at pupillage, someone working one-to-one tuition, they're constantly doing this. They're constantly asking questions, watching what's going on, and just tweaking what's happening to that student. That's what tests are really about. Any child we spot who needs remediation, so that moment where I spot something and I know the misconceptions, I can walk in knowing the misconceptions. One of the things we've done, taken the whole of maths and written down all the misconceptions for the whole of maths, the whole thing, from 0 to 19. So I can spot these misconceptions and then I can act straight away. Maybe it's just one student, or maybe there are 3 students, and I get them together and say, let's do this together. So I'm doing this corrective teaching in the moment, in real time, in that lesson, that same day. It's not about taking in some books, marking it, and then having a conversation a week later, which we know doesn't have a lot of impact. It's about acting straight away. And I keep doing this process, until I can't spot anyone at all who needs remediation. Those that don't need remediation while I'm helping, you could give them really nice enrichment activities to do, really nice topics, interesting stuff to do. And I'm doing this corrective, changing the scenario. Say, for example, I want a child to understand that the tangent graph has asymptotes. Okay? I know lots of you will teach GCSE Resit, and it'd be lovely if you ever had that conversation with them, but let's just go with that as an example. So I want them to know the tangent graph has asymptotes. For some students, I can say to them, tangent sine over cos, and they go, yeah. And imagine what happens when cos tends to 0 And they go, oh, wow, yeah. But most kids go, what? So then maybe I draw the tangent graphs and plot them out, and they go, oh, right, yeah, that's kind of neat. It's going to keep going. And other kids will go, oh, I don't get it. So maybe I make a unit circle, and I draw some tangents on that, and they say, oh, right, so the lines will become parallel, they'll never meet. Oh, right, that's kind of neat. And some other kids still don't get it, and I keep going and keep going and keep going until everybody gets it. Which means I need, as an educator, I need up my sleeve for all of those 320 ideas that come up in school level mathematics, 4 or 5 different approaches. So I need up my sleeve 4 or 5 different ways of teaching everything. When nobody has any need for any help, is the unit complete? If it's not, go into the cycle with the next idea, because the unit might be several ideas building up into a bigger idea. So go back into the unit with the next idea and repeat the process. When the unit is complete, what I now do, so I've been doing tons and tons of teacher assessment here. I've been spotting, I've been trying to identify gaps, I've been acting. Teacher assessment, even when you're highly skilled at it, and it takes a really long time to get really good at teacher assessment, even when you're really skilled at it, you will miss stuff. You absolutely will miss stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to back up our judgment by testing students. And again, they know this is not about labeling them. They know this is about me finding out things about you so that we can do something about it, because you will be successful. Every single one of you will always be successful. And they get into this mindset of, well, that's great. So it's just asking me this because it's going to make me good at this. Always. No matter what it is I'm learning about. It's always going to end up with me being good at it. So a summative test. Again, carefully designed. They're hard to design, but done well, they're very useful. Is everyone above 80%? If not, those that were, more enrichment, more extension, more interesting things. The lovely thing about the 320 ideas in maths that we're learning at school level is they're all infinitely extensible. They can just be stretched out as far as you want. So you can go well beyond the national curriculum. And you really should, because the national curriculum is quite embarrassing. You know, do more interesting stuff than that. By doing more interesting, more difficult stuff than the national curriculum, when students arrive at a GCSE paper, they go, is that it? That's the kind of attitude we end up with this cycle. And meanwhile, I'm doing correctives with those students here. The point of all this process, this test here, is not like a conveyor belt curriculum. In a conveyor belt curriculum, a test is about saying, these are the students who can, these are the students who can't, right, next unit. Which is madness, absolute madness to do that, because why would you do the next unit if they can't do the stuff it relies upon? But that's what happens in most of the Northwestern cultures. In this system, what the end of unit test is about is it's kind of like giving you an exit pass. It's kind of saying, can we leave this unit yet? Are we allowed to? And I'm going to keep doing this process until I'm confident that every single student that I teach can leave this unit. They can exit it. They're all secure in this. When I get to that point, when I'm happy that everyone can leave the unit, I then simply plan the next brick in the wall, and then off into the next unit. And of course, the start of the next unit is test the prerequisites. Well, those prerequisites are the things I just guaranteed that they were sorted on. They weren't allowed to exit that unit without being okay on that. So this bit, whereas a minute ago 30 of them went in and 20 of them come through, probably here now 30 of them come in, 28 of them are here. There'll always be someone. There'll always be someone that just needs a bit more, or you didn't spot something. That's fine. That's why we have this backup opportunity to do this. And then what we need to do is take the whole domain of our entire subject and map it out in a way that all these connections are in the right order, that the Jenga tower is built in the right order. And we stick to it. And I often see, as an inspector, I see a lot of teachers jumping off curricula into different lessons, chopping and changing. The order is really important. It's really, really important that you're going through it in those correct steps in that way, so that everything is laid down and put in place. So, in a nutshell, that's what the mastery cycle is about. It's applicable to all subjects. It's been used around the world for many, many, many years, and is highly impactful. What it is to just sum it up, what it is work out what kids don't know and teach them that. That's pretty much all mastering is. I hope that's useful for you.
Thank you.
I tried to get in my time, so maybe a bit
really well, thank you very much.
Right.
Okay, so I'm going to invite Bob to the floor. So, as I said earlier, Bob is the ETF Regional Specialist Lead for Maths and English. He's going to talk mainly around mastery in English. So he's going to look at 4 different subjects. He's going to look at engaging students, subject terminology, and developing writing skills, and also developing SPAG, spelling, punctuation and grammar. I'm going to hand over the clicker to you.
Which one is it?
That one to go next. Okay.
Wow, well this is a slot, isn't it?
Save the best
Wow.
for
Okay, Trevor, I think we're going to slot something in right at the end of the afternoon.
Yeah.
Yeah, so have I got about 10 minutes then?
15 minutes.
Yeah, okay, I'll finish it just before 5:02.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to kind of try and cover 4 areas with you. And I was planning to edit my slides, and I sent my early draft of slides to Deborah about 10 or 12 days ago. Little did I know she was going to print them all off because they're all in your pack. So you've got probably about 6 weeks worth of kind of training ideas in there. I'm just going to kind of explore that idea. Mark, I'm sure you know, is Mark, he's left, okay. Well, Mark made reference to, I don't think you mentioned Daniel Willingham, but this idea, memory is the residue of thought. Okay, I'm going to come back to that at the end of my little talk, because it's really interesting how, as teachers, in some ways you kind of think, well, that's obvious, isn't it? But sometimes there's all sorts of things that we get students to do. They may be talking, they may be working quietly, but are they actually thinking? People will only remember stuff that they think about, and they make an effort to think about. So I'm going to explore that idea in 4 different areas. Getting learners engaged, a big challenge in that autumn term. In terms of English, it's actually helping learners feel a bit more confident in using subject specialist language. I'm going to talk a little bit about developing writing skills and SPAG skills. So, an enormous challenge. I'm going to have to nip around these slides a fair bit, but I'd like to give you a little bit of a flavour of some of the ideas, because I don't often have an opportunity to work here because they're doing such a bloody good job here. My role with the ETF is to often go out and work alongside teachers. So I spend most of my time out in the classroom working alongside teachers who are trying to improve their teaching. And I'm going to share with you some ideas from these 4 areas that I think really indicate really good practice in English. Engaging learners. How could I sum that up? In terms of English, I would say in that autumn term, whether you're teaching functional English or a GCSE English programme, think about asking hard questions about easy texts. Okay, that's one of the key messages I've got. Messages I'll come back to. This is an example of a text that I use with some learners. Because I was working with a student, working with a teacher, and she said, my students, they just don't read enough. And I kept thinking, well, you've got to start from the stuff that they do read. Okay? And so a lot of young people spend a lot of time in Pret-a-Manger, Costa, Starbucks. So one of the things that I did in a little series of sessions was to bring in some napkins from Pret and actually get them to kind of look at that language, and the kind of questions that you can ask them, if the text is actually relatively straightforward to read, you can ask them really challenging questions that we know that they've got to be able to answer. If they're doing a GCSE, they've got to interpret, they've got to evaluate a text. But there's all sorts of questions you can ask them about this kind of text. What impression does Pret want to give of the food that it sells? How does it convey that message? And it was really interesting because it was stuff that we used to see, but a lot of English teaching is about raising our learners' awareness of language in use. Okay, and it's by asking, sometimes you can ask hard questions about easy texts. So the kind of, if I had time, I would have given an opportunity to look back at that text, which I will do. There's all sorts of interesting features going on there in terms of not just the choice of font, all sorts of interesting aspects in terms of word choice, and learners will often respond to text like that. They may not be able to describe the way messages are conveyed, are implied, but part of our job is to give them an example of how language is used. See, all of these key ideas, using the word creates, a list of three, use of informal language, the direct address, the customer, and the students I was working with are really, they came up with some really interesting insights into how that language was actually being used. So what followed on from that was they then began to look at language texts in the coffee chains that they visited. They began to notice stuff on the sides of the cups. Right. For those of you who are English teachers, that's a nice example of a rule of three there. A kind of parallel structure there. The sort of metaphor there. So it's helping learners become more aware of how language is used, and start from stuff that they're used to. You can begin to introduce some terminology to describe those kind of language features. So this little structure I often use when I've got time is, we know on the GCSE course we need to ask them hard questions about hard texts. They need to read a Stretch and Dickens, and they're then asked to evaluate that text. But often what I'm trying to demonstrate to you is that you can ask all sorts of hard questions about easy texts, because that's how you develop those higher level critical reading skills, where they're beginning to notice how language is used to imply certain messages. Moving on from that, these are some of the other interesting examples of text. And once learners get used to noticing this is when they begin to get engaged in an English programme. Not just by dishing out sample papers, but raising their awareness of how language is actually really used. And it's quite interesting when learners begin to bring in or find for themselves, they begin to notice things like alliteration, the use of some statistics. A learner actually worked at Starbucks, and she actually brought in the letter that was sent to her when she trained, and that's a really fascinating example of how they use language to project an image of themselves. So, nice example there, I think, of how you can use an easy text but ask very high level critical thinking questions about that text. Linked with that topic, how do we get learners to use more subject specialist language? Well, one of the things that I think that we need to do, this is the second key idea for me, is we need to model explicitly the way learners move from spoken to written English. That's absolutely crucial. Often we kind of think, we'll just put some sentence starters on the post and give them some writing frames. That ain't enough. If that was enough, they'd all be passing. We need to model that movement explicitly in the classroom. And going back to that example with the pret-a-manger text, you might ask in a session, how do Pret want us to feel about their staff? learner might come up with that answer. And often, you kind of you might be happy with that. You kind of think, yes, someone's got the idea. But a really good teacher, and I've seen this going on really well, will kind of, they'll not just accept that, but they'll kind of think, well, how can we shape that? How can we move that from spoken English to written English? So you actually model the kind of process, and then by asking a certain range of questions, well, how could we write that idea down beginning the use of the phrase? Do you see what I mean? You actually begin to move people from spoken English to kind of written English. And this idea of just asking questions, this is a really good questioning technique that Ofsted really like, where you're beginning to get learners to shape their own language use in the classroom. Really excellent example of stretch and challenge. So by kind of getting an answer from the student and then bouncing that answer around the room and saying, well, Julia, that was great, you made 2 good points there, but anyone improve on that? If we had to write it down, anyone link those 2 sentences with such and such? So you actually model how we move from the informal language of spoken English to the more structured formal language of in its written form. Here's another example there. You've got all of these on the slides. So this, I think, is absolutely vital, and is one of the things that when I see it going on in classrooms, it really does make a difference. We might want to model the use of those verbs, and often we see them on handouts and stuff, but to what extent does an English teacher actually make an explicit example of actually using them and supporting learners